Imagine working the graveyard shift alone when you hear footsteps in an empty hallway or seeing something move on security cameras that shouldn't be there. Night shifts are eerie enough, but for some, they turn into real-life nightmares. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into 3 terrifying true stories from people who worked the night shift and encountered something they can't explain. Let's get into it. Story 1. The Hospital's Fourth Floor by Nathan Halverson. Hospitals at night have an eerie stillness to them. The usual daytime chaos fades, leaving behind long, dimly lit hallways and the occasional distant beep of a heart monitor. I worked the night shift as a security guard at St. Vincent's Medical Center, a mid-sized hospital with an old abandoned wing, the 4th floor. This section of the hospital had been shut down years ago due to budget cuts, and no patients had been housed there since. The floors were scuffed, the paint peeling, and the silence too heavy, as if the air itself resisted movement. My rounds required me to check the entire building, and every night that included a walkthrough of the 4th floor at 3 a.m. I hated it. From the moment the elevator doors slid open, something about the place felt wrong. The air was dense, almost suffocating, and I always had the unsettling feeling that I was being watched. The hospital insisted that the floor remained empty, but I had heard too many rumors. Nurses hearing voices, janitors seeing shadowy figures, even patients on other floors reporting strange noises coming from above them. One night I was making my usual rounds when I stepped onto the 4th floor and immediately felt a shift in the air. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting strange, jagged shadows against the walls. My flashlight, brand new and fully charged, dimmed for no reason. I told myself it was just paranoia, but deep down I knew better. I walked past the old nurse's station, the desk covered in dust, and continued down the hall. That's when I heard it. A voice. "Help me." It was faint, almost a whisper, but clear enough to make my blood run cold. I froze, gripping my flashlight tighter. I turned slowly, scanning the empty hallway. Nothing. The doors to the rooms were slightly ajar, just as they always were, revealing dark, lifeless interiors. Then one of the doors slammed shut. The sound echoed through the empty floor, rattling down the hall like a gunshot. My breathing turned shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. I forced my legs to move forward, stopping in front of room 426, the room that had closed. I hesitated before pushing the door open. The room was empty, the hospital bed neatly made, as if it had been untouched for years. But on the floor, a single set of wet footprints. They led from the bed to the door, but not out into the hallway. I stepped back, my hands shaking. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but my duty as a security guard kept me rooted in place. I raised my flashlight, scanning the corners of the room. Then out of the corner of my eye, movement. In the reflection of the small dusty window, I saw it, a figure standing right behind me. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, but there was no one there. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back at my desk, my breath coming in ragged gas. I pulled up the security footage, desperate to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. The hallway camera showed me entering the 4th floor, but then, something I couldn't explain. A few minutes after I walked in, a shadow appeared in the hallway. It stood just beyond the reach of the flickering light, tall and unmoving. The timestamp rolled forward, and then the shadow darted forward, right behind me. My stomach twisted. The footage ended abruptly, corrupted, static-filled. The next morning, I reported everything to my supervisor. He listened quietly, then exhaled like he'd heard this story before. "Yeah, you're not the first one to see her." He didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. I just made sure to rush through my rounds after that. Story 2. The Warehouse Shadow by Eric Landry. I used to work the night shift at a shipping warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a massive facility, rows upon rows of towering metal shelves stacked with boxes, the scent of cardboard and machine oil hanging thick in the air. During the day it was loud, forklifts beeping, workers shouting, conveyor belts rattling. But at night, when the last shift clocked out, it turned into something else entirely. There were only 2 of us scheduled past midnight. me and a guy named Dave, who worked in the front office. I was in charge of scanning inventory in the back aisles, making sure everything was accounted for before the next shipment. It was a routine job, nothing special. Until one night, when I noticed something strange. At around 2:30 a.m., I glanced up at the security monitor. The camera that covered aisle 17 was glitching, flickering between static and a distorted, grainy feed. I figured it was just interference, but then, in one of the brief moments the feed was clear, I saw it. A figure standing between the shelves. I frowned. I was supposed to be alone back there. The only way in or out was past my station, and no one had come through. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward aisle 17, my boots echoing against the concrete floor. The closer I got, the colder the air seemed to feel. I turned the corner, sweeping my light across the shelves. Nothing, just stacked boxes and empty space. I exhaled, shaking my head. Must have been a glitch. But just as I turned to leave, I heard something, a soft scraping sound, like something dragging across the floor. I snapped my light toward the noise, my pulse spiking. Still nothing. Then, a box tumbled from the top shelf, crashing onto the concrete just a few feet from me. I jumped back, my breath hitching. There was no way it could have fallen on its own. The shelves were sturdy, the boxes tightly packed. My hands trembled as I reached for my radio. "Dave, you copy?" My voice came out more shaken than I liked. A burst of static. Then, "You okay, man?" I swallowed. "Thought I saw someone back here." Silence. Then hesitantly, "Aisle 17? The way he said it made my stomach drop. "Yeah, why?" Another pause, then, quietly, "Get out of there. Now!" I didn't need to be told twice. I spun on my heel, moving quickly back toward the front. But just as I passed the last row of shelves, I saw it. A shadow shifting just out of reach of my flashlight's beam. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs looked wrong, stretched, like they didn't quite fit its body. It stood completely still, yet I could feel it watching me. I bolted. I didn't stop running until I was back in the office, slamming the door shut behind me. Dave was pale, staring at the monitor. "It's back," he muttered. I followed his gaze. The camera feed was frozen, on a single frame of aisle 17. In the center of the screen, the figure stood facing the camera. But the part that made my skin crawl? It had no face, just a blank, featureless expanse where its eyes and mouth should have been. I quit 2 days later. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't want to. But every so often, when I pass an empty aisle in a grocery store or a dimly lit hallway, I swear, I can still feel it watching me. And sometimes, if I listen closely, I hear a box shift or a soft scraping sound, like something waiting just beyond my sight. Story 3, The Forgotten Patient by Michael Grayson. I used to work the night shift at a private care facility just outside the city. It wasn't a hospital, but a long-term care home for patients with severe medical conditions, both physical and mental. Most of the patients were elderly, but there were a few younger ones with neurological disorders. The job was mostly quiet, routine work, checking vitals, responding to the occasional call light. But there was one room that always unsettled me, room 32. It had been empty for years, yet it was always kept locked. Unlike other vacant rooms, no staff ever entered, and the blinds were permanently shut. Whenever I asked about it, I'd get the same vague response: "Just leave it alone." No one wanted to talk about it. Over time, I stopped asking, but every time I passed by that door, I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like I was being watched. One night around 3 a.m., I was making my usual rounds when I heard it. A knock, soft, deliberate, coming from inside room 32. I froze, staring at the door. Another knock followed, 3 slow taps. My stomach twisted. The room was supposed to be empty. My first thought was that maybe a patient had wandered in, but the door had been locked for years. I reached for my radio. "Angela," I whispered, "is anyone assigned to room 32? A long pause. Then her voice came back, lower than usual. "Room 32 is empty. Step away from the door." My pulse quickened. "Angela, I just heard knocking." Another silence. Then she spoke again, more urgent this time. Do not open that door. Get away from there. Just as she said that, the door creaked open on its own. A wave of cold air hit me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the hallway. My flashlight flickered as I aimed it inside. The bed was neatly made, the air stale, untouched. But in the farthest corner of the room stood a tall, thin figure. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, slightly hunched as if studying me. My breath caught in my throat. The shape of it was human-like, but off. The proportions weren't right. Its arms too long, its head slightly tilted. The more I stared, the more my brain rejected what I was seeing. Then it twitched. Not a normal movement, but a sharp, unnatural jerk forward, like something trying to figure out how to walk. The air grew heavier, pressing against my chest. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The figure took another step, its face still obscured in shadow. That's when Angela's voice snapped over the radio. "Michael, get out of there! Now!" I didn't wait. I bolted down the hall, not stopping until I reached the nurse's station. Angela was already there, her face pale. She grabbed my arm. "What did you see?" I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. The way that thing moved, the wrongness of it, I still felt like it was watching me. Angela exhaled shakily. "You should have listened." Then she told me the truth. Years ago, a patient had been placed in room 32. A middle-aged man with no records, no family, completely unresponsive. He never spoke, never moved unless assisted. He just stared at the wall. One night during rounds, a nurse checked his room and found his bed empty. The door was still locked from the inside. No sign of him. He was never found. Afterwards, staff reported hearing whispers, footsteps, and seeing a shadowy figure inside the room. Eventually, they locked it up, hoping that whatever was in there would stay inside. But sometimes, late at night, staff would still hear it. 3 slow knocks. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more creepy stories. Which of these stories gave you a chilling experience? Let us know. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real.